Tojo Fitness podcast again on this wonderful Thursday morning.
How are you doing, you lovely people? Today we're actually dealing with a topic which is pretty close to our heart. We're talking today about how to deal with anxiety. We're going to be speaking quite generally. We're not experts, but we have been there. Because pretty much in most of our lives, we are going to come up against the wall of anxiety.
Yeah, just when you least expect it. We all understand what that is, that feeling in the pit of your stomach that makes you feel sick and you can't put your finger on it. You're not really sure what it is. It's just an underlying sense of doom that's just about to happen.
You see, anxiety is the body's natural reaction to a stress. Stress is going on whether you're aware of it or not, whether it's conscious or unconscious, the body is reacting. It's a feeling related to fear of what's to come. Sometimes you'll feel it, like Tom says, in your stomach. Sometimes you feel it in your throat. It's almost like your throat closes up. You'll feel it potentially in your chest. Perhaps there's a bit of a tightness going on. And any place that you actually carry tension. So if you find potentially you've got, really tight shoulders, bit of a tight neck, bit of a tight back, have a check to see if you actually carry your stress there. Is your shoulders up by your ears?
Because actually, anxiety is something which has helped the human race and animals to survive and grow and adapt for thousands and tens of thousands of years. But in modern society, of course, there's a lot of things we don't need anymore, but that have stuck with us from evolution. And so now we have this anxiety response that once would have saved our life, but just now makes our life very unpleasant.
So basically what happens is when we feel under threat, our bodies start to react. And you've heard us say this before, they release certain hormones. Those hormones are called adrenaline and cortisol, which can be helpful in certain situations. So these are responsible for your fight or flight response. So for example, if you're walking down the road and you feel you've got someone following you, about to chase you, adrenaline and cortisol will kick in and you will be able to run faster than you ever have done in your life.
You'll either suddenly turn into Bruce Lee or Linford Christie, or there's a third one because it can be a freeze as well.
Yeah, totally. They help us feel more alert so we can actually act faster. Now, what they do is they make our heart beat faster. So I don't know about you, when you feel anxious, like your heart rate increases, you feel unable to grab a breath. Sometimes you feel really hot. And what that happens is that where these two hormones, they quickly send blood to where it's needed most. So they're like, right lads, we need to act, we need to respond into the body.
Of course, the problem is that's okay if you're in a primitive society or situation and you've got to run away from a rampaging rhinoceros. But if you're going to do a speech at a wedding or something like that, and then you've got all this adrenaline and cortisol around your system, it does pump all this blood into your stomach and your muscles and so on. But it seems to pump none into your head, and you get up there and you're blah, 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 because you've gone blank. Your brain has frozen because your animal nature is being energized and ready to take over. And so, of course, it's a problem for us all.
Yeah, it is. You see, under the umbrella of anxiety, there are certain different headers. We're not going to deal with all of them today, but there are certain headers, for example, general anxiety disorder, which is the most common. So they reckon back in 2013, about 8.3 million people of the population, I believe of the UK
it was, yeah,
was suffering from a form of anxiety. And that's either general anxiety disorder, very common, social anxiety. So, for example, triggers are you going to a party, you're in a crowded restaurant, you're in perhaps a crowded venue, and that starts to trigger you. Panic anxiety. So, for example, that covers panic attacks, phobias, PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder, OCD, You don't know anything about that one, baby.
I know nothing about that.
And there are many others which are actually covered by the umbrella of anxiety. We're going to talk largely between general anxiety disorder and panic anxiety today.
Yeah.
That the two areas we're actually going to be camping in. And first of all, we want to talk about what are the triggers. There are always triggers somewhere to our anxiety.
And often these are triggers which have been predicated in our past by things that have happened and have registered in our psyche. So, for instance, when I was a little kid, I was out in the garden. I must have been 3 or 4 years old, and I was in my welly boots, my red welly boots, and I was wearing shorts and nothing on my feet, just welly boots. And I remember looking down and seeing this dirty great spider had crawled up my welly boots, and as I saw it, it fell inside my welly boot. And I remember at that point thinking, what do I do? If I pull it off, I'm going to squash this spider against my skin. And I just stood there and screamed. Now, I don't remember what happened after that, but I do remember that probably fed into my dislike of spiders to this day. And it created panic then. But in a young mind, it writes it into your psyche in such a deep way that you end up replaying that panic every time you see a trigger point for the rest of your life.
Yeah. So one of Tom doesn't do spiders to this day, by the way. I am the spider hero in our household.
Let me just cut in there. We have an arrangement. See, Jo deals with spiders. If there's spiders in the house, she deals with them. If there's snakes, I deal with the snakes. It's fair.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, anyway, so triggers. I know for myself, airports are a huge trigger for me, and that is the most silliest thing. You're going to think, airports? This should be exciting. What happened is that, about 10, 11 years ago, I actually had a major panic attack in an airport. And since that time, you always kind of expect that you're going to react the exact same way in the right circumstances, and they're called triggers. But what if you don't react the same way as what you did back then? Now, what we're going to say is, here's a question. How do you find your triggers? What are your triggers? You're sitting there with this sense of anxiety, you've got an increased heart rate, you can't quite put your finger on it. How do you find them? Well, there are certain things in your life that have potentially happened, conscious or subconscious, and they leave a scar.
Can I give another example there?
Yeah.
Because I think examples are really helpful. When I was a kid growing up, long before the age of emails or anything like that, after Christmas you had to write thank you letters. And I hated writing thank you letters, along with every other child that's ever existed. Now, thank God, that's a form of abuse which has been relegated to the past. But I remember my mum standing over me, and she was determined that my thank you letters should be perfect. And so it started off, dear so-and-so, dear Auntie Norma, thank you so much for your kind gift of the oversized home knit jumper. It is exactly what I wanted for Christmas. I hope you had and so it goes on. And I remember writing these out, but the thing is, if I got it wrong, my mum would dramatically take the paper and rip it up and get me to do it all again. And that's left with me a sense, to this day, filling in forms. I hate filling in forms. As soon as you put a form in front of me, my heart rate rises, my eyesight narrows in, sometimes even see red. I start feeling trembling and shaking, and it's the adrenaline and cortisol starting to come around my system for a fight or flight reaction. And to be honest, when I see a form, I want to flight.
You do flight.
I want to flee.
Yeah, totally. So you kind of sit there and examine. You need to kind of be in the moment with the anxiety, and actually ask yourself, what is making me feel this way? What fear? What has actually stirred this within me? Now, here's the thing: is that when you recognise them, and these could be past experiences, these could be fear of the future. When you recognise them, do know that in your triggers there is a way of you heightening your triggers, and triggers can be heightened by an overfeeding of caffeine. So they heighten the sensory areas of the limbic system of the brain. So when you are anxious, it knackers you out. And some people go, I need a coffee. No, don't have a coffee at the time of your heightened anxiety. Alcohol also increases those sensory parts of the brain, and also the food you eat. Processed food is designed to heighten our anxiety levels.
Yeah, because it creates increased desire for more of it. And the knock-on effect is that we then start feeling anxious.
Yeah.
So very, very important. Try and understand what is it that are your trigger points. Once you know what your trigger points are, then you can start dealing with them. And actual fact, it's not something you have to deal with all your life. You can say, actually, I really want to see an end to this. This can become manageable. And I think the thing we want to say to you is, from our own experience and working with people for decades, is that this can be something which can become very, very manageable in your life. Jo, why don't you tell us about the coping mechanisms?
Yeah, so I've actually had, let you in a little secret, I've actually had CBT for anxiety. And that was because I was going to fly to India. And I needed to be on a plane for 10 hours plus. Hated the fact when the door started to close, I had no way of getting out. So I went to a counsellor for CBT. And here's one of the most helpful things that she said to me, because anxiety for me actually led into full-on panic attacks. In my brain, get me out, get me out, get me out. And here's the most important thing that she said to me that stuck with me. Is in your anxiety, your adrenaline levels start to rise. She said, now what happens is when your adrenaline levels reach a cap of about 80%, they start lowering themselves. There's nothing that you can do. You let your adrenaline do what it's going to do. Now, what that means is when I'm in full-on panic attack mode, I think to myself, if I don't get out, something bad's going to happen. I'm going to die. I'm going to have a heart attack. And the thing is that you can never fully reach 100% of a full-on meltdown, because by the time you reach 80% of what you think is a panic attack or what you think is a meltdown, your adrenaline starts to cap off and it will start decreasing automatically without you doing anything at all.
And that's all part of the wonderful parasympathetic nervous system, which kicks in. The sympathetic nervous system gets us ready for fight or flight. The parasympathetic nervous system just gets us back down to a zenned out, chilled out place again. But the great thing is that there are some life hacks which will help you initiate this parasympathetic nervous system and get it up and running a little bit faster. Why don't you tell us some of these?
Yeah. So first and foremost, breathing techniques. Breathing techniques. When we go into anxiety, we start holding our breath. Here's the thing. When you start breathing again, anxiety will start to decrease. And here's the thing, is when you take a big deep breath in, and that big breath out that I've just made, that big sigh actually activates the parasympathetic nervous system. What that means is in that big sigh, the brain starts to release hormones into the body to counteract the cortisol and the adrenaline. It's almost like the calming hormones start to be released into the body, and the body will itself start to sort itself out.
This is why meditation works. Because meditation, your breathing generally slows down into a slow but deep breath, which activates the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, you try this out. Next time you feel panicky, I guarantee you're holding your breath. And you can do this. We'll do this with each other sometimes. I'll see Jo and she's getting frustrated with something, and I'll say, breathe.
Do I ever get frustrated with
Well, sometimes you do, honey.
Yeah, it's true. I do find if I'm doing lots of text messages, I hold my breath a lot.
Yeah. Anything which causes stress, we hold our breath. It's like when we're training people in a gym, we're always saying to people, keep breathing. keep breathing, because the natural thing is to hold your breath, but actually it's the worst thing you can do. So breathing techniques, deep breathing, not only does it put oxygen into your blood, which is fantastically helpful, but it also activates this wonderful system that starts bringing you down to calm again. And everybody can do it. It's not addictive. It's not going to cost you anything to buy from the chemist, and you don't need a prescription.
Yeah, so try, in that situation, try breathing in through the nose for a count of 4, breathing out through the mouth for a count of 4. Now, that's going to take a lot of practice. Don't just do it when you're feeling anxious. Do it when you're not feeling anxious. Because what will happen is, in the midst of the anxiety, you come to breathe and you find that you've actually exercised that muscle enough that it knows what to do. So secondly, I want to talk about anchors. And this is something that I found really, really helpful. I would sit and I would meditate, and on my wrist, I don't know if you ever train with me or you notice, I always have a hair tie, a hairband on my wrist. Even when I had no hair, I had a hairband on my wrist. And that is an anchor for me. And what I did is, during my breathing times, I would play with the hair tie. And it was a symbol of calm for me. I assigned deep breathing to the feeling of me playing with my hair tie.
And this is the incredible thing about power of association.
Yeah.
Is you can do that. And so eventually, just touching the hair tie will start the process of slowing down kicking in your parasympathetic nervous system, even if your breathing is still all over the place. Yeah. It's an incredible mechanism.
Yeah. So just the thought and just the feeling of my hair tie on my wrist now is almost like a calming effect on me.
Other anchors you can use, you can just grab your left earlobe or right one and just squeeze it gently. And that's another good anchor. So to create an anchor, you put yourself in the place mentally where you want to be, the place of relaxation, the place of joy, the place of confidence and happiness and peace. And while you're doing that, you do that. So, okay, I'm squeezing my earlobe now. And then later on, if you do that enough, it creates an anchor which is powerful enough that when that earlobe is squeezed, your body starts calming down. It sounds crazy, sounds weird, but
it
folks,
works.
It's true.
It works. This can work for a ring on your finger. This can work for a necklace around your neck. Anything that you can assign a feeling of calm to, give it a go.
This is why stress balls work.
True.
Stress balls don't do anything for your muscles, but what it does is, by the squeezing of the stress ball, you learn to associate a reduction in stress with that action.
Yeah, so that's anchors. Next, coping mechanisms for anxiety: exercise. Exercise. Why exercise? Because you breathe. And it also releases those feel-good hormones, the ones that combat the stress hormones. So when you come to exercise, how do you feel afterwards? Like, you feel flipping amazing, don't you? And you're like, why didn't I do this before? And usually our anxiety traps us in this cage where we don't want to do anything. We just want to curl up in a corner, let all the world just go past by. Get out, get exercising, go for a walk, do some stuff at home, do some stretching, do some yoga, anything that releases those hormones when you actually come to exercise, and that's going to combat anxiety hugely.
And of course, there are things you can do which are going to create anxiety as well. So if you're a gamer, I love gaming, Joe loves gaming, we all love playing a bit of Call of Duty or something like that. But when you play that, you'll notice your breath is held, your shoulders start coming up, your level of anxiety is increased because you're in this, you're deliberately putting yourself in this fight or flight situation, which is why you often don't sleep well afterwards. So you do have to just be aware of the things, the triggers which can set it off, and the anchors which can bring it back down again.
Next coping mechanism I find really, really helpful. I actually went for cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT. I do believe in that.
Yeah.
I believe that our minds can be rewired. I believe that we can take a negative event which happened in our life which would cause anxiety, and we can reassign some different emotions to it. So, for example, if you always get depression during the winter, what if you approached a winter and thought, what if this year it would be different? And you change your outlook on life. You change the way you approach something. You change the way you think about something. And that's the whole thing behind cognitive behavioural. It's the cognitive part of the brain, the association part of the brain, that you start to change.
Yeah, so instead of seeing, you may have grown up in a household that every time it rained, everybody moaned and moaned and moaned. Now, let's face it, we prefer sunshine to rain. But if that happened, it's left you with this sense of doom and gloom every time you see rain. Perhaps you need to go out and dance in the rain. I was in Africa many years ago and there was a drought, and the dam had all dried up. There was no water. We couldn't have showers or anything. And there's getting to the point where there wasn't even any drinking water. And then one day it rained. And running outside, we just danced in the rain. And that changed things. It created a strong connection between rain and joy. And I still love that now. When we see rain, and it's, especially on a warm day, beautiful thing.
One of the other things on coping mechanisms that I really want to highlight is this sentence that you have control. One of the major things when you experience anxiety or panic anxiety is that you feel largely out of control. You feel that there's no way that you can calm your body back down. And here's the thing, is you have a lot more control than what you think you have. And you can gain control back through breathing, through anchors, through exercise, through CBT, but also through positive affirmations. So, for example, I used to go to Blue Water, and as soon as I hit the car park in Blue Water, my brain said to me, you do know the minute you step in that shopping mall, you normally panic attack. And the brain has this amazing function of reminding you of all your failures in your life.
Isn't that true?
And so I step into Blue Water and my mind says, oh, it's normally about now that you start getting hot and sweaty, that your throat starts to close, that your eyes start to narrow and your heart rate starts to increase. And somewhere inside of me, I respond and go, oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And when actually, if I start, I guess, like rewriting those affirmations that my mind just takes over on, like, I do enjoy shopping in Blue Water. I do enjoy going to the airport. I do enjoy when this happens. And so you start to rewrite those kind of like negative statements in your brain.
Yeah, as a man thinks in his heart, so he is. The way you speak about yourself is the way you're going to be. So, just this idea of saying, I'm strong, I'm confident, I can do this. When your brain hears that, your brain can't tell the difference. This is something which they've discovered in neuroscience recently. Your brain can't tell the difference between when you're faking it and when you really believe it. And when you say, I'm strong, I'm confident, when you say it with conviction, even if you don't believe it, your brain goes, oh, well, that must be true then, mustn't it? And it starts creating, your shoulders will come back, it starts creating that environment for the strong, confident person to live in.
Yeah. So my challenge to you on positive affirmations is write 5 statements down. Write them on your phone, write them, put them on a post-it note on your fridge. Every time you go to either your phone or your fridge, repeat them in your brain. Repeat them, repeat them, repeat them. And when you come to a time of anxiety, repeat them. And see what happens to your body as a response to that. So they're the main coping mechanisms. So breathing techniques with meditation, anchors, exercise, CBT, just remembering you have control, and positive affirmations. And here's the last thing that I want to leave you with. We get frustrated with ourselves when we start getting anxious. And all of a sudden we become this split personality. And there's this person within you, there's this woman or this guy within you who is scared, who is fearful. And then there's this other person that says, for goodness sake, will you stop doing this?
There's a bully. isn't there? We've talked about this before. There's a bully, and what's interesting is if you try and identify whose voice is that, whose is the bully's voice. It might be a parent. Doesn't mean they were a bad parent necessarily, but they may just have criticised you on everything you ever did. Maybe a school teacher. Try and identify who that is. That will help you pick apart your past and find out where this stuff comes from. But as Joe said, it's almost a split personality thing. There becomes a bully and there becomes the bullied one.
The victim.
And I was always told, if you allow yourself to be bullied, you become a victim. You need to stand your ground and you need to shout back.
Yeah. And what happens is this one that's fearful, they really need someone who understands. They need someone to take them by the hand and say, do you know what? You're going to be okay. This is going to be okay. You're going to get through this. And what you need to do is to pair up that bully who's inside of you with the one that's fearful.
Oh, that's good.
And you need to be okay with being with yourself. The phrase that says have compassion on yourself this is what we're talking about. Don't get frustrated when you start having panic attacks. Say to yourself, actually, I'm going to hold my own hand and I'm going to say, do you know what? You're doing really well. You're going to get through this. We're going to breathe this together and I'm not going to get frustrated with you, because that little girl or that little guy inside of you just needs a little bit of understanding, and the panic and the anxiety starts to dissolve.
Why do you think, what makes you think that methods for changing behaviour that do not work with other people are going to work if you apply them to yourself? If you take somebody who's having a panic attack and you shout and scream at them and tell them that then they really need to get control, get it together, they're such an idiot, it doesn't work. We all know this. But why do we think that it's suddenly going to work if we apply it to ourselves? It doesn't. What we need is compassion.
Yeah. So hold your own hand. Be with that little girl. Be with that little guy inside of you and actually tell them that it's going to be okay. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to diffuse the panic or the anxiety that you are in at this time.
This has been the Tojo podcast. We're so glad we've been able to spend this time with you. Have a fantastic week. Be empowered to know that you can do this. You've got this. You have control.